All right, welcome to the video lecture for Chapter 13, the last one of the semester. You have made it this far. Congratulations and good luck as you wrap up this semester. The Chapter 13 deals with crimes against the state. And like Chapter 12, according to the syllabus, we are only actually covering 9 pages from this chapter. We are covering more the definitions in terms of these crimes rather than some of the other applications of similar crimes like the Patriot Act. So treason is the crime of levying war against the United States or giving aid to its comfort and enemies. Treason is the only crime defined in the United States Constitution. You can find it in Article 3, Section 3, as well as in the United States Code of 2006. The elements of treason are one or more overt acts of levying war against the United States or giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States, with the mens rea of the intent to commit an act of levying war against the United States or giving aid or comfort to the enemies. And so in addition to 1 or 2, you have to have 3 for the purpose of betraying the United States. There are circumstance elements. You have to have 2 witnesses to 1 overt act of treason or a confession in open court. So you cannot prove treason without 2 corroborating witnesses or a confession in open court. So this crime is very hard to prove. Those 2 circumstance elements are very difficult and challenging to establish and prove. And that was intended for, the framers intended this to be a severe crime that is difficult. It is a capital offense. You can be sentenced to death for treason. And we see the framers also add some other limits. They banned state legislatures from creating new treason crimes. Another limit is the crime is 2 witnesses to ensure that there is a certainty that this person is engaging in treason, or the open confession in court. And then these limits are not just thought of or added on later. These limits are actually contained in the body of the Constitution itself, which means to change it, we would have to amend the United States Constitution, which is an extremely difficult and challenging task. So since, as far as treason prosecutions go, throughout our entire history, only about 30 people have ever been charged with treason. Almost all those persons who have been convicted have either been pardoned or had their sentence commuted from death. The only exception was the execution of Ethel Rosenberg during the Eisenhower presidency, where she was charged with treason and conspiring to give Sirius the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. She and her husband were both executed in 1951. So that it's an extremely infrequent crime. It's not, and it was intended to be so. I guess that's really, I really want you to know these kind of foundational aspects about the constitutional requirements and limitations of this crime. I think it's also important that you know and be able to explain that this is a capital offense, so that someone convicted could be sentenced to death. Our next crime to discuss is the crime of sedition. So sedition is advocating the violent overthrow of the government. This can be conducted through speech, just speaking to somebody. It can be written down. It can be conducted through conspiracy. And we also have the Sedition Act. So the Sedition Act makes it a crime to write, print, utter, or publish any false or scandalous and malicious writings or writings with the intent to defame the United States government or excite the hatred of the good people against the government. The Sedition Act was passed by Congress in 2006. It focuses on conspiracies that advocate violence, primarily. No one has ever been charged under the Sedition Act, so we won't spend any more time on it, and it's also just something to be aware of, that there are not cases under this act. The next crime discussed here is sabotage. Sabotage is the crime of damaging or destroying property for the purpose of hindering preparations for war and national defense during national emergencies. And we have a Sabotage Act passed in 2012. So here our actus reus can be broad. We have destroy, damage, obstruct, or interfere with, contaminate, or produce defective war or national defense property. Mens rea varies here. We have a circumstance element that it happens during a time of war or another national emergency. You have to be both the factual and legal cause of the harm and the damage. Your book has a you decide case here. It happened in Tennessee, where we had some, in 2005, some anti-war group that consisted of an 82-year-old nun and 2 Army veterans break into a Department of Energy building where enriched uranium was stored. They then spray painted anti-war slogans, hung crime tape with banners and biblical phrases, splashed blood and sang hymns. When the security guard finally arrived, they offered him bread and read him a loud prepared message. And then they voluntarily surrendered to the custody. So it's kind of a situation where, do you think that this is sabotage or not? And then you can eventually it is found that that they did that for the slight so the case went to court. So it's a you decide, so you propose that, but then they do provide you with what happened in a court. We do have a dissent, but we have the majority finding that even though there was a time of national emergency, we had the war against terror going on, that the majority opinion is that no reasonable jury could find the defendants cut through the fence to let Al-Qaeda onto federal government property. They cut through it for an anti-war purpose. Therefore, there is this kind of idea of a national emergency existing right then, based on their actions, isn't what this was intended for. So basically, it'd be likely that you might be charged with something else, but it is not sabotage, according to the majority opinion. Like I said, there is a dissenting opinion where the dissenting judge does think that a reasonable jury could find them guilty of sabotage here. Alrighty. Moving on to our next crime, which is espionage. Espionage, the other more common word for this is spying. So there are actually 2 crimes in the United States Criminal Code. One is espionage during peace, and one is espionage during war. The elements of espionage look at collecting, recording, or publishing, or communicating, or attempting to elicit an intent to communicate that information to an enemy, any useful information, any information useful to an enemy of the United States, and during war. And then we also have the during peace version of this. So there is a lot here. I'm not asking you to read this part of the chapter, but page 530, there is a list of those who've been charged under the Espionage Act. And it ends with, since the book was published, it ends with Edward Snowden. He has not actually been prosecuted. He's still in Russia right now. But he is the most recent person to have been charged under the Espionage Act. And we first got our Espionage Act in 1918, and it has since been amended since, I think, 2009 was the most recent amendment of the Espionage Act. But if you find this type of crime interesting, definitely encourage you to flip through to the next page and just look at people who have been charged and what they were charged with. That is the end of the required reading for the class. The rest of this chapter focuses on anti-terrorism, but it's not as many cases as it is kind of an overview of certain phrases, terms. So that's why I choose not to cover it in this class. If you're interested, it is available for you to read. It is easy to understand and consume, and I would highly encourage you to do so if this is an area where you're interested in. But espionage is our last crime this semester. Page 529 is the last page of the book you're required to read. So for this chapter, you really want to know the definitions of the crime and the basic foundational history, like that we have an Espionage Act from this year. We had the Sabotage Act from 2012. Those types of things are the things I'm looking for you to take out of this chapter and move forward with. Congratulations on making it to the end of the semester.